Hi there, welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu as always, and I love spring. It's a beautiful time of the year, sun shining, got some warmth. It's a difficult time with the trees though, because things like the wind have a massive impact. Other things that have an issue around my yard, in particular pests, possums, love to come out and nibble on some of that fresh growth that we get at this time of the year. But all in all, it's just a beautiful time of the year. You know, I've spent a lot of time today actually moving trees around the yard, optimising their viewing positions and maximising sun length for different species, making sure that everything's well and truly tied down because that wind is a problem. When it kicks up, it kicks in pretty strong. So I've been tying lots of trees down, going down doing some more work on the watering systems, making sure I've got a ladle squared off. Like I said many times, it pays to be prepared now for what's coming very, very soon. So I do spend a hell of a lot of time going around checking watering systems and making sure I've got everything squared off, so it's going to work as reliably as it possibly can for me. So I've been spending a lot of time doing the weeding. It's one of the downsides with this growth that we get with our trees, is that weeds seem to take off at a rapid rate, a lot faster than trees do. So I've been trying to stay on top of that as best as I possibly can. And I've also been doing a hell of a lot of fertilising lately too, making sure that liquid feeds as well as the tea bags, doing as much as I possibly can around the yard now to give everything that maximise what I can get out of spring. Every year I'm the same, so I just find that I run around in circles and try and get everything done to the best of my ability. Anyway, so this podcast, before I ramble on too much about my work around the yard, which I'm sure you don't want to hear about, I want to talk about a couple of things which are related. One is Internodes and what they are, and how we manage them, and why they're really important when it comes to bonsai. And the other was a question which was raised on Instagram, which was about genetics, on whether we as bonsai practitioners, you know, it's better to choose species with certain genetics to optimise the viewing pleasure of the trees. And I just want to give my 2 cents on that in this podcast. So let's get into it. We'll start talking about internodes first, and then we'll move on to genetics. So, but like I said, they're pretty much interrelated. As I sit here, stretch back on my chair, have a nice little swig of my lukewarm coffee that's sitting on my desk, I think about bonsai, and I think about, what do I love about really good bonsai? What really attracts me to a mature tree? And often it's the ramification. So it's the light, very fine branching on a tree. Take, for instance, we'll just pick one randomly. We'll just pick a deciduous, because they show their structure over winter, and you can really see a nicely developed tree that's got really fine structure, right? And you look at it and think, wow, you know, that's a lot of work, and it's just beautiful. And everyone's the same. I'm pretty certain that everybody listening to this podcast will know what I mean when you come across a photo or a picture of a beautiful deciduous tree in the winter silhouette. Then you look at the ramification. You know, there's nice trunk, there's nice primary branches, nice secondary, but really it's that feel of the really fine branches that makes you go, wow, you know, that's old, that's grown for a long time, and it's been managed really, really well. And internodes play a massive part in what we can perceive as a fine bonsai, or as a highly developed bonsai. And an internode is the distance between two nodes. So if you think about it from a developed, or any tree that's grown a branch, it's the distance between the buds. All right. So on a Japanese maple, they come in pairs of buds, and it's the distance between those pairs of buds on the branch, which is the internode. For something like a Chinese elm, or a beech or something like that, it's the distance between the individual buds because they have alternating bud sets or buds, and it's the distance between those two buds. So effectively for us with bonsai, the internode length affects or is shown on the ramification, right? So it's that distance between where a branch will fork or where you'll get branches growing out of one particular branch. And internode length is really important because it's something that is the desirable end game for your bonsai. You might find that when you're growing your trunk, you're not caring about, it's that checkbox system. You're not really caring about the ramification when you're developing the nabari and the trunk, right? So that's step one. Is trunk and nabari. Step two, primary branches. You're really thinking about internodes then? I don't think so, because it's then about branch placement on the trunk and sort of, lower branches thicker than the upper branches, no problem. Secondary branches come around. You're thinking about internodes? Again, not particularly, because, on a decent size bonsai, the primary branch and the secondary branches are going to have a little bit of space between them. So internode length really doesn't play a massive role at that point. But the last stage of development, which is the ramification stage, is internodes are the most important thing. If you've got a tree that's got really long internodes, let's say the internodes on them are, 5 centimetres apart, a couple inches, 3 inches or 5 centimetres, something like that, then you can't have a small bonsai. That has to be a massive tree. We have to talk about, we talked about perspective and stuff last podcast, but that was more from your viewing angle. But also when you're looking at trees as bonsai, one of the things that I pride myself on is, when the photo's taken of that tree, it's sort of like you can't exactly tell how tall that tree is going to be. It could be, it could be 10 centimetres tall or it could be a metre tall, because it's all about having the correct ratio. And internode length plays into that as well. So if you've got this 5 centimetre internode, then really, you're to make it look like it's a finely developed tree, then that tree has to be enormous. It has to be really, really tall, around the 1.2 metre tall at least, to try and get those, when you sit back and look at a photo of it or an image of it or view it from a distance, to see that to see that fine ramification as delicate, then it needs to be from a long way away. So internodes have a massive part to play in the final step of your tree's development. And it can be hard if you've got a tree on the flip side. If you've got a tree that's got really fine internodes, really, really narrow internodes, then you can find that doing the development stuff, letting the trunk develop and letting your primary branches develop, that can be harder as well, because it keeps wanting to dwarf itself and stay small and split and divide and never really get that full trunk line. So the two sides of the coin are, you've got really fine short internodes, or you've got really long coarse internodes, and ideally, you want somewhere in the middle of those two. It's not nice to have a tree that just will not develop a trunk, that will not grow and give you that thick taper that you want on your tree, on your bonsai, because the internode length is so short. So that's where genetics, which is the next part of what we're going to talk about. I'll save that for later, but we'll come to that. So we've talked about what internodes are. It's the distance between the nodes or between branches, potential branches on a tree, and why they're important. Now, how do we manage it in spring? So if you're listening from the northern hemisphere, put this in the memory bank. If you're in the southern hemisphere, then this is what we have to do. You need to understand for each of your trees how you can shorten the internode. Is there a way that you can do certain things or work on your bonsai to help shorten the internode? Now, I preface this by saying any work that you do on your bonsai should only be done on trees in peak condition. I've said it so many times, but it's so true that if you want to reduce the strength of your tree, or you want it to take massive backward steps, then start buggering around with internode length. by methods of things like defoliation or decandling on a weak tree. It'll set it back and maybe not kill it straight away, but it certainly is going to put it on that downward trajectory to going in the green bin. So before I start any of this, make sure your trees are nice and strong and healthy before you do any of it. Okay, so that said, then you work out, as we've talked about before, what stage of development or refinement your bonsai is in, because that has a massive part to play. If you're going around and you're pinching out, you've read somewhere, pinch your maples, or you've heard Scott say, pinch your maples this time of year, and you're pinching things that haven't fully developed yet, then that's possibly going to be the wrong thing for you to do. So you really need to work out on that sliding scale, what stage of development, what are you trying to achieve by doing this work on the tree? Don't just do it because you can. Do it because your bonsai is going to take a step forward on its plan, on its path, right? So things that we can do, like with Japanese black pine and red pines, for instance, is decandling. As the spring candle grows, then that just extends and becomes an extension of the current branch, right? So one branch keeps growing into one. By decandling at the right time of the year, you activate dormant buds. Those buds start to grow. And based on the time that we decandle, we shorten the potential growing time for those buds, which means that we can then reduce the internode length. That's one of the things that we achieve by decandling, is to reduce the internode length for the next bud to grow. It's just one of the things, but it's really important and something which, if your tree's strong enough, it should be done every year on your black pines. The other thing, another type of pine, like let's say white pine, Japanese white pine, feeding the tree at certain times of the year, encouraging backbudding, allows us to have buds grow out at different points on the branch, and anything that gets too long we can prune back and therefore shorten the internode on the branch based on the backbudding that's been achieved as well. Go to Japanese maples. If you're at that point where you want the ramification, you're at the pointy end of what you're trying to do, or you want to stop an area from getting too strong, then you can go in and pinch it. And with Japanese maples, the way that they grow, normally the way that they grow is the first internode that forms starts off quite short, and the theory is the quicker you can get in there and pinch it, hopefully, because it doesn't always happen, hopefully the shorter you can keep that internode. So the longer you leave it before you pinch, that internode length extends. All right, so if you let it grow out to, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs of leaves, by the stage you do that first internode can, and I say can because it doesn't always happen, can be quite long, which means you're defeating the purpose of having a short internode. So if you're, like I find at the moment, for me, spring starting, I've got all my buds starting to pop. If I want short internodes, then I've got to be out there every day and be pinching the stuff that's growing out, because the longer I leave it, the longer that internode's going to be. The longer the internode is, the less likely I am to keep it on the tree. So therefore I have to cut back further onto that branch. Other things like a trident maple, the internode length sort of stays fairly fixed. So it doesn't really matter if you don't pinch it straight away. You can let it get out, 2, 3 pairs of leaves and then come back in and cut it off or pinch it out. But the longer it gets, the thicker it gets. So you don't want thick, coarse growth. So I find this time of the year I repeat a lot of the same stuff, because it's really important with reinforcement to make sure that you're onto it and you're achieving the best you possibly can for you and for your bonsai. So the internodes, we can manage them on the trees by pruning. The quicker you prune, the finer the growth's going to be, the shorter the internode hopefully is going to be, and the smaller the next bud that's going to grow is going to be as well. So if it's on something like a beech, let it kick out. You can pinch out the tip of the new growth on that as well, and that helps to push that growth back in, or keep the internode length nice and short. So internodes, they have a massive part to play with every single species. And it doesn't matter. You can use different techniques I talked about before, like defoliation. So defoliation is the removal of leaves off a tree to stimulate another flush of growth. All right, and it can be used to weaken an area or to stop resources going to that area. It also can be used to force back budding and to reduce internode length with shorter growth, because it's a weaker growth than what comes at this time of the year with spring. It can be partial, it can be some leaves, it can be all the leaves, and I'm not going to go into everything to do with defoliation now because it's complex, and it's 100% going to be one of those ones that you don't automatically do on each of your trees just because you look up what defoliation is. But it's a technique that can be used to force back budding on different species and to push this internode length back. And it is a tool that we can use. I say that they are tools. Pruning is a tool that we can use to shorten internodes or minimise internode extension. That's probably more important. But understanding what internodes are, that distance between the nodes, understanding why they're important because we want that fine ramification, and understanding that there are ways that we can help, with techniques like decandling or candle cutting on different species, or pinching or pruning back. That they're all different things that we can use as bonsai practitioners to help the internodes not extend or become useless to us. Because once they do become too long, that's exactly what they are. Things get too coarse, things get too long, start pushing out the silhouette and start becoming worthless to us. And at this time of the year, knowing that it is spring, we've got that powerful burst, which is why I'm bloody feeding so much at the moment and making sure everything's getting sun and everything's kicking off like it should be, because I want to harness it, because it's only once a year that we get this massive burst of growth. And it's, all the plans, the plan that I have in place for my trees, it either gets, a gold star or it gets a red cross saying you've missed the boat, and you need to therefore review what you've done and possibly go backwards a step to fix it again. So internodes are really important, and I'm going to draw a breath now, have another sip of that coffee, because I feel like I've just rambled for the last 15 minutes about internodes. I'm going to draw a breath, and then we're going to talk about genetics and how the choice in genetics can or may not help us. That's better. All right. So genetics that I want to talk about. I want to talk not about genetics of bark or colouring or anything like that. I want to talk about genetics when it comes to leaf size, internodes, needles, needle length, that sort of stuff. Because the question that was asked was, do you think it's better? It's more beautiful and a better visual representation for the viewer if we choose certain varieties of conifers that have shorter needles. And with this answer comes the prerequisite that the tree's suitable for bonsai. Okay, so if it's suitable for bonsai, then genetics can have a massive part to play. The flip side to it is that there may be techniques that we can use that help reduce the needle length, like decandling or candle cutting, or the leaf size that the trees have by defoliation. There's certainly things that can assist you. So even if the tree, when you look at it, doesn't have perfect leaf quality, internode length, something like that, there are tools we have in our arsenal that we can use to help the tree, or to help the design of the tree suit something with better genetics. And there are advantages to getting trees that possibly don't have ideal genetics to grow as well. I'll use, for example, the example of a trident maple. All right, so if you want to have fine, and don't forget, in the back of your mind, sorry to jump around on this, but in the back of your mind, I want you to think about that scale that I use for the development of a tree. So step 1, trunk and nabari, right the way through to step 4, which is the ramification, okay? So step 1 is the trunk, primary branches, secondary branches, ramification, all right? So if you've got a trident maple, right, when you look at it, a piece of advice I was given a long time ago, which is bloody great advice, when you look at a maple in winter when it's got no leaves and you're wondering about the leaf size that this thing's going to have or how it's going to grow, if you look at the bud size and the branch thickness where those buds are, it's a pretty good indicator about how that tree is going to grow. So on one hand, you've got really fine little buds, you've got really fine growth. That tree should have really fine, smallish size leaves naturally, and it should grow fine ramification. If you look at it and the branches are coarse and thick and the buds are quite thick and large as well during the winter dormancy, then pretty good chances are that's going to have a bigger size leaf and its growth is going to be quite coarse and the internode length is going to be longer. All right, this is all ballparks, but it seems to work. It was told to me and I thought, I'm not sure if that's true. Went checked my own trees and went, that's smack on. That is exactly what's to be expected, because what you see is what you get, right? So if you're looking at the tree from that perspective, then you might say, all right, how's that going to impact my bonsai if it's just a stick in a pot, right? When it's got the fine, delicate growth, your ramification at the end point, the end game, is going to be lovely. It's going to be really, really nice. But what's that going to do for step 1 on that tree? The development of the trunk and the nabari. Is it going to hinder that because you're going to end up with this really fine, delicate growth that maybe doesn't grow as aggressively as tree number 2? Tree number 2 is going to be great at stage 1. It's going to be brilliant for trunk development because that thick, coarse growth is going to take off. And when it takes off, it's going to really meet up that trunk. So you've got one set of genetics which is going to help you with the trunk development, and you've got another set of genetics which is going to help you with your ramification. Which do you choose? Which do you choose? For me, I would, even though it's going to be a longer process, I would choose the tree with the better genetics at the start, because I know from experience how hard it bloody is to get a tree with a maple. I'm talking about a trident maple in this instance. To get a trident maple with that thick, coarse growth and those bigger nodes to ramify and to look really, really beautiful. Whereas I've found that I can get a tree with that fine, delicate growth by coercing it. Maybe it takes longer to grow and to do what I want it to do, and the sacrifice branches don't get anywhere near the extension in the same year. But I find that when I want to get to that end game, if I put those 2 trees on a pedestal side by side, I'll look at the one with the finer growth, the better genetics, and go, you're the one for me. That's it. You are the one that I want. And I know there's a lot of frustration with bonsai that how long is this going to take? And, I want to get there. What's the quickest growing? What's the fastest way to develop a trunk? I get the question every couple of weeks, what's the quickest way to develop a trunk? It's like, there's no quick way to develop a trunk, especially if you keep in mind that, the end game is beautiful ramification. There's no point having the most magnificent trunk in the world with the worst ramification, because it'll never get to where it's going to get to. And yeah, sure, I'm sure someone's listening to this now going, but you could graft. You could graft, but I think that there's better ways to do it. And grafting definitely is an option, but I don't know if I'd be bothered with it. I think I'd start with a nicest set of genetics on that trident maple and work its way through. So then, let's talk about genetics on other trees. Let's talk about Australian natives. Australian natives make brilliant bonsai, absolutely brilliant bonsai. And, talk about genetics and internodes and all the stuff from this podcast. And vast majority of Australian natives fit into the category of being perfect for us. They develop rapidly, they grow, almost all year round. They've got, often there are larger leaf species, of course, but, I'm just talking about vast majority have got really fine leafing as well. The internodes can be kept very short. They love to backbud in most instances, and, I can't cover every single variety, but a lot of them tick the boxes when it comes to genetics and internode length automatically with what they are. So I think that I'd assume that you can walk around. I walk around nurseries and I look at Australian native stock and I think, yeah, perfect. Even if you look like you've got really long branches now and you're half dead and the growth's on the outside of the branches, I'm very confident with the vast majority of a lot of the trees that a lot of the natives, and I can't, I say this with caution because I'm sure I'm going to get messages about which ones won't work like this, but vast majority you can look to get budding on further in and reduce that branch length. They've got lovely, internode lengths and they can be refined really, really well, and they'll develop trunk structure very quickly as well in our environment, in our climate, and they grow beautifully. One of the things with natives is, they have their natural areas that they grow within our continent, within our country, and it can sometimes be not the best thing in the world to take them out of that natural environment and put them into another one, because then they may struggle. There's reasons why they grow naturally in certain areas, and you sort of take it for granted, I suppose, when you're in that area and you see them growing so well, and you go, oh, another one. But try to harness the potential for those natives that grow in your local area, because they love what's happening around your where you are. So we can enhance that and we can make them magnificent in that environment. Anyway, so if you look also then at pines, like Japanese black pines, right, or any pine, genetics do play a big part. And for me, it's the needle quality that I look towards, and the structure of the needles and the color of the needles. But do I rule particular pines out or particular trees out as a result of that side of the genetics? I don't really, because I always work on the strength of the tree and the health of the tree, which then naturally starts to push a nicer quality needle. And often when you're at a nursery or looking to buy, it's very hard to tell whether, for that microsecond that you're there and you make a decision whether you're going to, add a tree to your collection or you're not. It's very hard when you look at it to determine whether, is this peak health? Is this the best condition this tree is going to be in? So therefore, is that what I expect genetic-wise on those needles or that branch structure or that bark or whatever it is? And I'm from my experience, I'm inclined to say no, because there's been some pretty average trees that I've been able to pick up and add to my collection, where over years it can take a long time to bring a tree back to health. But when you get it back to health, the true characteristics of that tree are visible, and then you can use the different techniques that we've talked about, like decandling and whatever else, to reduce those internode lengths and needle length and whatever else. And trees that I may have walked past in my early bonsai journey that I've acquired somewhere recently, used a couple of years to build the health of the tree, not focused on wiring styling or internode length or anything like that until I've got the tree to a point where I'm satisfied that that's it, that's peak condition. Then I find I can take those trees a lot further with good management and good practices than anything in the contrary. So yeah, I think that genetics definitely is something that we can, but don't rely on genetics alone to dictate whether we should use them for bonsai. There are species or varieties of black pine that I don't particularly like's not the right word. I don't particularly gravitate towards. That's probably a better way of saying it. I'm not always drawn to them, and I find that a lot of people, when they first get into pines, they're drawn to these varieties that have this really thick, dense growth, and maybe that's because they want short internodes, and from lack of understanding about how we can use things like decandling and whatever, it might seem like an easy fix, buying a tree with the genetics to keep the growth in really, really close. I find that the growth on those particular varieties can be extremely coarse and unforgiving as well, and I find it hard to manage the growth to get it to be anything other than a sort of little shrub. And they're not, like I said, it's from my experience that I would steer away from certain varieties, because I know that there's a lot out there that we can do to manage the needle length and internodes through the good techniques of health and pruning that can be done to sort of kick them to another level. So I know it's a roundabout way of answering this question, but should we choose genetics in every instance? Maybe it's definitely something that's to be considered. When it comes to things like pines, the one set of genetics that I really look for, or the one characteristic for the trees that I'm really drawn towards, is bark, because that's one thing that I know that through the different techniques that I use in my tree management, right the way spring candle breaking, decandling, autumn cleanup, whatever it is, bud selection, I can do all that, and I can manage the foliage and the growth that the tree gets, but I can't make the thing get bark. And there's some old pines that I've got that the genetics that they've got just don't have that real thick, coarse bark. And like I said, you get the corky bark black pine, and they put on bark at a rapid rate of knots. It might seem like an easy kill to go for something like that, but there's definitely downsides in that thick, rapid growth of bark as well. When it's done right, it is bloody magnificent. It is perfect. But there's grafts to consider. There's what that's going to look like in the future. So a young tree that's going to put on lots of bark, but it's got a graft that's sitting above the ground, and the root stock is not going to develop bark at anywhere near the rate that the upper bark will. What's that going to look like, in 10 years' time? A lot of people jump into them and go, yeah, I want this really thick, coarse bark. And then, 10 years' time, you look at it and go, well, I wish I'd chosen better at the start. So genetics has to be something that's considered. Would it stop me from going down a certain path? No, I don't think it would. Would it make me gravitate towards, one of two trees, one with better genetics than the other? Yeah, it would. I definitely think it would. But I don't think it's the ultimate. I don't think it's the only thing that I would go for, because there's, often you'll think about bonsai being, thick, coarse, fat trunks, massive trunks in little pots with this foliage. But there's a beautiful side to bonsai where they're light, they're dainty, they're elegant. So not everything in your collection has to fit a certain mold or a shape or a style. You can change it up. It doesn't mean you need to go through the bonsai style handbook and make sure that you've, whatever tree it is fits a certain mold, that it's going to be a XYZ style, whatever it is. It just means that, sometimes the genetics of the tree or the characteristics of that tree can be used and harnessed and enhanced to make it beautiful. It doesn't need a trunk that's, a metre wide to make it magnificent. There's beautiful trees that have got very simple, slender trunks, of sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 centimetres across, then they can be the ones that you stop and look at more than something that's just a big, meaty, fat trunk with an ugly trunk chop on it somewhere up high. So to answer the question around about way, yep, internodes, really, really massively important when it comes to genetics. Other characteristics when it comes to genetics, yep, certainly important. Leaf, needle quality, genetics, yep, certainly. But are there techniques that we can use to reduce needle length, to reduce leaf size? Yeah, there is, and it's all part of that that learning process and that evolution of how we manage our trees. Spring is a lovely time of year. It really is, and from the messages that have been coming through, it seems to hit a chord with a lot of people when we come out of, especially down the southern part of Australia, when we start to come out of the cooler period, the darker period, the daylight hours start to get longer, and that sun starts to shine, and we start to get some warmth come back, and everything comes back to life. It seems to strike a chord with a lot of us, especially tree lovers, because I was at a school teaching the other week and looked out the window, and there's this big row of Manchurian pears, and they were all in blossom, and oh my God, it looked like it was snowing. The petals were coming off the trees, and it was just magnificent. It's an image that'll stick with me for a very long time, and I really love it. But it's a time where that change of season always brings with it, that nervous factor. Trees start waking up at different times, which means their water uptake is going to be different. So watering's really tough for now. It does get easier. Once everything starts growing, you can start blasting everything with water. But for now, I know this morning I was walking through the yard, and probably there's 10-15% of the trees that I've got that still didn't need water from yesterday, whereas the rest of them look like they're all growing and pushing along nicely. So just be careful not to overdo it, and watch for the change in elements too. The wind definitely brings with it some good and some bad. It does dry out the pots a lot more. It does make things from overhanging trees fall. It does blow pots off benches. So it's something that I always think that if you can plan for the worst and hope for the best, then you'll be in a better position than if you just stick your head in the sand. And that comes to everything, like I said, watering system, summer, or whether it's tying your trees down. Don't leave it too long. Don't think that, there's not much foliage on those things, so I don't have to worry about tying them down just yet. I'd do it. I get asked, what do I use for my tie downs? You might see in some of my photos. It's a black strapping that I picked up in Japan, and unfortunately I've never been able to find it. It's got no English on it, so I can't work out what it is, but it was used to tie down the plastic on the outside of the greenhouses over there, and it's very strong. It's got like a fiberglass ribbing in it, so I find that it's fantastic for me. But the other thing that I use is aluminium wire as well. I find that the cost of a couple of straps of aluminium wire, of 2.5, 3 mil, something like that, bigger trees, bigger wire, smaller trees, smaller wire, that cost is minimal compared to one broken pot or a tree that gets knocked off and smashed as well. So it's part of what I do almost every day, is go out there and think, what if? If something's going to go wrong in this part of the yard, what is it going to be? Is it that branch off that tree? Right, I'll cut that one back so it's not overhanging that area of the yard. What about watering system? Is this one likely to block up? All right, what do I have to do to try and help it? Put a secondary one in or backup or something like that. So, like I said, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and make sure that you keep an eye on everything too. It's that time of the year with lots of delicate growth. I'm having issues with possums nibbling on the succulent new growth. Pests are an issue. I'm making sure that I'm fertilising trees as appropriate to get the most out of them for the growing season, and lots of time walking around the yard just picking things up. Leaves off trees falling, branches off garden trees falling down, and just making sure that my general maintenance is tip top. So I encourage you to do that as well, because it'll make your bonsai look better. And when you're walking around your yard having a cuppa or a beer or wine or whatever it is, you'll you'll certainly appreciate them a lot more. I find that if I do the work in the morning, by the time I do my afternoon walk around, I can sort of, keep my hands in my pockets and go, yeah, well, nothing to do. All looks great. It's nice and easy. So anyway, make sure that you, as always, get out there and inspect underside of the leaves for damage. That's the tip for this week. And weed the ones at the back of the benches as well. Don't just do the ones that you love. Make sure that you're reaching across the benches and getting to those ones at the back because, as I said, there's always potential in everything you've got on your bench, no matter what it is. And don't put them into the fire pile just because the genetics aren't exactly what you want. There are techniques that you can learn, work on the strength of the tree, the health of the tree. Then you can use different techniques to make adjustments to growth rates, internodes, and all that sort of stuff. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks to the subscribers too. This is the shout out to them. There's more people coming on board, which buddy, that's awesome. Really, really means a lot, and I thank you greatly. If if you've just found the podcast, I hope you enjoy it. There's a few people jump on board all the time, so welcome, and make sure you show the bonsai love. And until next time, as always, happy bonsai.